And good evening, this is Dr. D with another video talk for you tonight. And I call this talk From the Billboards to the Blacktop. But before we start, let me read something from just a passage from the Course in Miracles for you. It says, "When I am healed, I am not healed alone. And I would bless my brothers, for I know, being healed with them, as they are healed with me." So let's take a deep breath before I get into our talk tonight. And let's allow ourselves to be centered. And let's allow ourselves in this moment to let Spirit speak to our hearts and our mind. And let us put our emotion aside for a moment and let us realize that we really are pure spiritual consciousness living in a human experience right now. Dear God of many names, right now we breathe in peace, breathe in courage, and we breathe in strength. And so it is. So, I'm talking to you a little bit tonight about stuff that I don't usually make public. And tonight, from the Billboard to the Blacktop, is about a real difficult time in my life that lasted for a couple of years. Backstory is there was a time that as an entertainment figure that I went to work by Rolls-Royce and limousine. In fact, there was a time that Rip Taylor borrowed our Rolls-Royce to take Liberace out for his birthday, and then I was at Lee's house for his birthday party. And there was a time that when I was living in Palm Springs at that time, this is my fourth time to live in Palm Springs, but that I was sitting at the table with Carol Channing, various celebrities, hobnobbing, was treated as part of the who's who of Palm Springs society. And there was a time that, even during those times, that I could give $5,000 easily. And as we move forward from that time to me leaving Palm Springs and having various shows in different parts of the world for short periods of time, and being in Los Angeles and doing some work and then coming back to Palm Springs. This time when I came back to Palm Springs, I was driving an older SUV with a lot of miles on it. No air conditioning. In the month of July, when it's 115, 118, 120 outside. And I was able, because I had taken early Social Security, the little bit that I had, because I'd worked mostly without paying into Social Security in my life, and thought my investments that had been stolen from me would see me through. million worth. I ended up living out of a storage unit from 9 to 5 when they were open, and then sleeping in my car with no air conditioning at night at some side street. But during this time, I also know what it's like to do drugs and have sex with people for a place to stay. And quite often, many nights during the week, I would hook up with somebody, do drugs, have sex, maybe with one person, maybe with two people. And quite often, some of these people would have friends that I would spend the night with at a different time. You know, January is a month of sex trafficking month. When we talk about it and recognize it, there are various forms of sex trafficking. And usually sex trafficking occurs from those who have to those who have not. And they have control. I've seen so many times where a younger person who's attractive, who has nothing, meets an older person. It doesn't have to be an older person, and many times it is an older person, okay? That they're taken in, and the requirement is sexual favors for a place to stay. And usually, not always, but 99% of the time, drugs are involved. And pretty soon, you don't even have low self-esteem. You have no self-esteem. Shame and guilt. And quite often you hear me say that shame and guilt never did anybody any good. And it doesn't. Shame and guilt never going to make somebody be sober. That's got to be something they desire themselves. But the shame and guilt will cause you to hide from yourself and to put a mask on even more. You know, the greatest secrets are the secrets that we tell ourselves and that we hide from ourselves. Who are we? What have we become? And it's so easy to say, well, I'm not like them, not like those. So I actually spent a couple nights with one of the hookups. And he informed me that I probably had contracted an STI, sexually transmitted infection or disease, and that I should go to Desert AIDS Project, also known as DAP, and have a checkup. I didn't want to go because, you see, many years ago when I was somebody, I had helped do fundraisers for DAP Health. I had sat at that table with Carol Channing and various people of influence. I couldn't possibly go. And I went kicking and screaming. And sure enough, I had sexually infection. there's what's called early intervention specialist. So of course you're assigned to a caseworker, and even though I'm sleeping in my car and doing the storage and had money coming in from my little Social Security, but not enough to pay for rent anywhere, I still couldn't tell the truth. So I couldn't say that I was homeless, but I was homeless and hopeless at that time. And I used an address of somebody that I had hooked up with a couple of times as an address of contact information, because I didn't want to be like those who were homeless and on the street, you know, them, their kind, like those. So I got the caseworker and was able to get some benefits, and got a doctor and got prescribed medication for HIV, and I've been HIV for 44 years, and being HIV is not something that you want to talk about. Being HIV is not something that you want to disclose, and when you sleep with different people and you have sex and you're doing drugs, that isn't something that you bring up in the conversation, because again, the shame, the guilt is too much. It's way too much. So I told nobody of that story, and finally I came to a breaking point, and I shared a fact that I was actually homeless and that I really wasn't staying at the address that I had given, that I was really living out of a storage unit that I barely could afford to pay for, and out of a car that had no air conditioning, and that I needed help. And in doing so, I was assigned a therapist. And of course, first I played the game. You know, you tell the therapist what they want to hear, and then while they're yabbing on their gums and going out of their little book of therapy, you're already 2 steps ahead of them to tell them what they want to hear, so that you can give the correct answer of what they want to hear. This wasn't my first time in the therapy circle. I knew how therapy worked. I'd been in therapy for a dissociative identity disorder years before, and managed to work through some of that, and that's a whole different topic. And finally, the therapist saw me. I don't mean that saw me physically. They saw me physically, of course, when I would go for my appointments. But finally, the therapist saw me. Really saw me. And that was the breaking point. That somebody actually saw me. And in them seeing me, I begin to be able to make changes. Because you see, you can't heal what you can't feel. And you can't claim what you can't name. And I wasn't feeling anything except shame, of course. Didn't know how to handle things. And I wasn't young at this time. I was in my 60s. In Palm Springs, you can still be hot in your 60s and desirable. And at that time, I was doing the presentation as a gay male, not as a trans female. So where do we go? What do I do? I got on a waiting list for housing. The waiting list was 3 to 5 years. At 60, how do you get a job? Especially when you have a doctorate, when you're highly educated. Who's going to hire you to wait tables? Not going to happen. So this lifestyle continued for months. Let's just be real, continued for a couple of years. And I began to be getting food bags from the food bank and gas cards to get to my medical appointments. But nothing seemed to change. Even with the therapist, though he saw me, some things were changing. But you know, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And the thing that I've learned in my life is you can have dreams and they stay in your head, or you can have goals, and goals take action. So I cut down on the drugs, and I cut down on the sleeping around. Instead of it being every night and being passed from one person to another, which really is sex trafficking. Let's be honest about it. I stopped that behavior. I was sick of that behavior. I was sick of me. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I wanted to die. I wanted just not to be on the planet anymore. Here I had been somebody. My picture had been on the billboards. I had a CD that did well in Europe. I had been on TV programs. Here I was. What was I at this time? I could not even identify what it was that I was walking around as. But one day I went to DAP and I did my usual appointment and was better at telling the truth. I say better at telling the truth. I still lied to look good. But I told more of the truth than I was before. It wasn't just out and out the whole, it wasn't just some big story I was telling, right? It was that I would omit certain things that would make me look not good. And I decided that I would check with the apartments across the parking lot because I had my name in there. My name had been in there for a couple of years. And I walked in and I had been at DAP on a Tuesday before, and the lady from the housing department, Riverside Housing Department, happened to be there. She said, I think your name is on a list here. I've got a housing voucher for you, but you're gonna have to find the place to live. So I took my voucher and I walked across the parking lot to the apartments that were there. And I said, I know I'm on the list, and I know it's a long list, and it probably seems hopeless, but I just said I would ask. And the assistant there said, no, the list is still long, whatever. The manager came out of her office and she said, don't you have some kind of voucher? And I said, yeah, I just got one here. And she said, I've got an apartment that's coming open, but it's not going to be available for a month. She said, if you can get a $20 money order and sign the documents here, we can send it into the company and see if you pass the clearance. I didn't even think my credit would pass, believe it or not. Then it could be yours. You come off the list. So I went across the street to the store and I got a $20 money order. And I did the paperwork. A month passed. That apartment wasn't available still. But I got cleared in the credit. I got cleared to inhabit the place. And an apartment was coming available, and it would be October, but I was going to be able to have that apartment. And DAP, Desert Age Project, DAP, would help me with my first month's rent and help me with the deposit. Sometimes you have to see where you're going, not where you're at. And let me ask you, where are you going? And is it a dream where you're going? Or is it a goal where you're going? A dream will stay a dream. A dream, you'll always have potential. Oh, I have a dream of having my own business. Oh, I have a dream of being a writer. Oh, I have a dream of whatever it is. It's going to stay in a dream as a dream and a wish. It stays in your mind. You have a goal. You put action to those goals. And in your mind, you begin to envision yourself in that spot. Yes, I read earlier about I am healed as others are healed. And in this process, a inner healing began to take place within myself. And the behavior that I was in, full of shame, full of doubt, full of confusion, full of emotional and mental sickness at the time. The, what would I call this? The insanity, the insane thinking. I realized that you cannot get to the next place with the same thinking that brought you to this place. You have got to change your thinking. And in changing your thinking, your thoughts become who you are. The Bible verse says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Or as a person thinks in their beingness, in who they are, that's what they become. So, what are you becoming? What are you thinking? And as I often say, what you focus on expands. What do you focus on? If you're sleeping with somebody different every night and doing drugs, what are you focusing on? You got it. That's what your life is. Your life is what you have focused on and envisioning. And your dream is dream. But if you have a goal to be something different, you start taking steps and action out of the goals. So my behavior began to change. And I moved into the apartment, studio apartment. I hadn't lived in a studio before. I'd lived in big homes. Studio apartment, but it was mine. And I had to really, really, really rein it in as far as my pride. I didn't want to be there. In some ways, I wanted to be homeless in the car still. because I could justify being there because of the guilt and the shame. I couldn't justify the guilt and shame that I felt by being in a studio apartment. That was for low-income people, people that were less than me. But let me tell you something, we're all the same. We're all the same. And the truth is, there's only one of us here, just many parts of us. And I've often said this before. People say, well, Rev, what do you think, what's sin? And I said, sin is when we think we're separate from the Godness, the Creator, the love. And sin is when we think we're separate from each other. I'm not separate from you, and you're not separate from me. And if you happen to be on the street and unsheltered, you are me. I'm just dressed up a little nicer right now. And when you get to a point where you're dressed up a little nicer, you never want to forget from where you came. And you can either choose to grow through it, or you can choose to go through it. Because, my friends, it's a choice. You always have the freedom to choose. And as Marion Williamson says, and quotes from A Course in Miracles, a miracle is a change in perception. So as I'm telling this story, and I moved into the apartment, and a year or so later, I actually became employed at DAP Health and began to develop a real sense of family, but still hiding from the shame, hiding from the guilt, using my theater background, my minor celebrity background as a cover shade for the depth of my shame and guilt. And there comes a time, in order to heal, you've got to pull the skin off the onion. You've got to peel back the layers. And you've got to let the hurt show. And you've got to let the love of people around you, I'm not talking about the lust, I'm talking about the real genuine love that comes from Creator through people. And to love you back into health, love you back into wholeness, love you back into wellness. So what was my motivation for going to work with DAP Health? I wanted to make sure that people felt seen, felt heard, felt valued, felt like they weren't a throwaway. Because at this particular time, going from the Billboard to the Blacktop, I felt like I was a throwaway. And moving back to Palm Springs, I remember when my billboard was out on Highway 10 advertising a show. On Dage Palm, another billboard. On Highway 111, main highway going in, that there was the Ivana Tramp show, which was my show. So living it and in the dream, the reality, different. So today, I'm telling you this story because I'm just like you. And because my hope today is, by sharing this, that something that I've said will resonate with you and will help heal your heart, help heal your mind, help heal your spirit, help you to become a whole person. It doesn't happen overnight, but you got to take action one step at a time. And yes, if you take 2 steps and you step back one, you still got one ahead of the steps you had before you started. And then don't beat yourself up because you're not running races with it. Because this isn't a marathon. This is a, dear God, show me who I am and help me to be the person that I am meant to be. That person filled with love, that person filled with light, that person filled with kindness, that person filled with peace. One of the lines from A Course in Miracles says, our job isn't to seek for love. It seems like everybody's seeking for love and we get lust and love all confused. But it says our job is to remove all barriers and all blockages from keeping from knowing and receiving and giving love. And as we begin to remove the blockages of resentment, the blockages of shame, the blockages of guilt, the blockages of the shame of the past, then inside of us, and one of the sayings that people quote me on is, we don't evolve, but we unfold. All of that stuff is in us. And as we begin to move the stuff away, the blockages, the barriers, all that, then we begin to unfold into who we really are, the big S, the big self, instead of the small, egocentric self that is always searching and never finding. So until next time, this is Dr. D. I'm sending you love. I'm sending you peace. I'm sending you all the light that I can send right now. And so it is in this moment.